death, fire, ash, and rebirth have been historically symbolized by the phoenix. For many people who have a near-death experience, they come away with a knowing, signified by the phoenix, that humans are immortal. A near-death experience is a kind of experience that 5% of America's population has had in the 21st century alone. That is 15 million people. Near-death experiences most often occur in relationship to trauma, like a terrible accident or a medical emergency. An experience that produces the clearest and most permanent memories in a person's life.
So what is a near-death experience? Well, as the name implies, you're near death. In other words, you're so physically compromised that you're unconscious, and you may even be clinically dead with an absent heartbeat. Now, at this time that you're that physically compromised, you shouldn't have any lucid remembrance at that period. But people do, and that's the experience part of a near-death experience.
Upon returning to the physical world, it brings a lasting sense of purpose. And, most importantly, the loss of the fear of death.
People have a near-death experience and they come back to this world knowing that bodily death is not the end, that in fact it's an expansion, it's an opening. More than 90% of NDEers across all cultures, and this includes some who might have previously considered themselves agnostic or atheist, but more than 90% of NDEers come back not just believing in, but knowing in a benevolent, kind of loving intelligence at the core of the universe.
Loss of the fear of death? I mean, what's death? Big deal. I've already died. Big deal.
I say don't be afraid. It's going to be okay. I've attended a lot of deaths as a minister. I was by many people's side, and also family. I hold their hand. I try to send them light. I say to myself, in a moment, the wink of an eye, they'll know what I know, and all will be well.
I don't fear death. I am curious about the process of death, the physical act of dying. You know, we're physical, we ask, is it going to hurt? Is it going to be drawn out? What's that going to be like? But dying itself, I have no fear over. There's a little bit of me that's actually quite excited about the concept.
I found that the fear of death really is about the unknown. It's not about what they believe will happen. It's more about, have they a sense of where it is they're going to go and what it is they're going to encounter. And that's where near-death and shared-death experiences become so valuable, because we have such a rich resource of people coming in and saying, this is what happened to me.
The near-death experience as an adult, that, you know, you have a background of things to be fearful about. And the main thing was I was no longer afraid of dying.
I have no fear of death.
Going forward, I don't fear death, but I'm so much more appreciative of life and living each day to the fullest.
You know, I used to be scared of death, and now
I absolutely have no fear. That's the first thing I would say. I have no fear of death.
Mindy Totfest's near-death experience occurred in 2016, sitting alone on her couch.
Suddenly felt what I could only describe as an electrical avalanche as it came rustling down from my head to my toes. And as that happened, I knew I was in desperate shape, that I didn't have much chance of surviving this. And so instantly I start praying, and I'm thinking, God, if I can survive this, whatever's happened, this has got to be a brain aneurysm or something. If I can survive it, please let me. And I'm looking at my front door, and it's open, and I'm waiting for my husband and kids to come in and give me hugs and kisses and tell me about their day. And my heart breaks, because I know they're going to be running in to find my body. And as a mother, I couldn't fathom that. It broke my heart. And so I just sunk into deep, deep sorrow and pleading with God. And as I was doing this, I knew my head was bobbing. I was losing consciousness. And the next thing I know, I stop and I look around, and I'm in pure darkness. And I thought, okay, this is different. And I didn't know where I was. Being a Christian, I was expecting, out of the body is to be present with the Lord. And so I'm expecting to be greeted by Jesus. I'm expecting my loved ones to come and greet me. And so I wasn't sure if I had crossed over. I wasn't sure where I was. And so my first instinct was to put my hand out in front of my face and to see if I could see it. I was trying to assess if it was dark there or if there was nothing there to see. And I couldn't see my hand. So my next instinct was to start clapping. And when I did, I realized I didn't have hands. And that's when the realization hit me. I've really died. I've crossed over. So I started turning in and trying to assess where I'm at, and I'm waiting expectantly. I'm trying to accept that I've crossed over. I'm praying for my husband and kids. I didn't know if they'd found my body yet. I wasn't sure exactly how much time had elapsed, because it seemed like I'd been there so long. And as I waited, that's where I started getting more and more distressed, because the longer it went on that no one came, the more I started going, uh-oh, something's wrong. Well, what have I done? And I'm praying, I'm saying, Jesus, be my righteousness. Jesus, I can't get in without you. I don't know what I've done. Why am I being held separate? I don't understand why you're not coming for me. And I turned into a very deep sorrow. I'm still mourning the loss of my husband and kids here on earth, being separated from everything. I almost felt like my consciousness was expanded, but I was being held in an invisible box and being held separate from everything. And that's what was so crushing. I could feel God. I could feel the source all around me. It was just immense, this immense force that contained everything. It was everything from the beginning to the end, everything that ever was or will be. It was all there in its primordial form, surrounding me, and I was cut off from it. And I didn't understand. And so I began pleading and crying. I begged God, to reveal to me, why am I not good enough? Why have I never been good enough? And I didn't have a life review like a lot of people do. My life review was more of a self-reflection, where I'm looking at my motivations in life and my actions towards others. And it was revealed to me that I never lacked loving other people, but I lacked loving myself. And it wasn't in I don't want to say that it would be like ego driven, some people may take it as that. It was more of you have to learn to love yourself, to do the things you're supposed to be doing in life. It was eventually revealed that I had had a vertebral artery dissection, which means there was an artery in my brain that kind of split open in a couple of places. So I was very lucky to have come back from that.
David Coombe grew up in rural Nebraska and has been a jack of many trades. He had a life-changing near-death experience and now researches phenomena from what he calls the beyond.
I was diagnosed with COPD. I was gasping for air. I was going up the stairs, trying to talk to my girlfriend, saying I need to go to the emergency room. And I was scared, but afterwards, I don't know if that was before the near-death experience, before that I got diagnosed, but I just remember being kind of scared, but then afterwards, and experience it later, it was just so, it's hard to explain. It was just so overwhelming, but so the experience, afterwards was so loving. I just remember looking up and the shimmering figures, but then behind them, these big bright lights. You couldn't see anything around you, just these bright lights and these shimmering figures around me. I don't think they were relatives. I almost feel like they were angels. And if they weren't angels, they were something out of, I don't know, it's hard to explain. It was our worldly, or how do you say that? But yeah, it was just so amazing, And then, like I said, I don't fear the death thing anymore. I've become even more spiritual.
Dr. Yvonne Kason has published 6 books on spiritually transformational experiences and is founder of Spiritual Awakenings International. She has had multiple NDEs, and the first as an adult occurred during a 1979 plane crash into freezing waters.
The near-death experience that really changed my life was when I was in this medevac plane crash at the age of 26. So as a young doctor, I was accompanying a critically ill patient in a small twin-engine airplane, a Piper Aztec. We were trying to fly her, myself, the pilot, and a nurse. We were accompanying this patient to bring her to a larger hospital with an intensive care unit. This was in northern Canada, so northern Ontario, in winter. The plane flew into bad weather, a winter storm, which happens in winter in Canada. They say that both of the air filters of both of the propeller engines froze over, which is what caused the malfunction. And first one engine stopped functioning, then the other engine stopped functioning. And so there we were in the air, no engines going. The plane starts, jostled by really, really bad turbulence going down to the ground. And I'm, of course, totally aware of what's going on because it's a small plane. I could see and hear that both propellers had stopped. So as we were crashing down to the ground, my immediate reaction was intense fear and panic. I remember just this fear, this terror rose in me. And like a reflex out of my heart, the thought came, oh God, help, I'm gonna die. And it's interesting because actually my near-death experience started then, before the plane had crashed, as the plane was coming down to the ground. And what happened was this force field of peace started descending on me, and it literally was like it was pushing down all of my pain and all of my fear. And instead, I felt this incredible peace and this incredible calm. And then I heard a very clear inner voice. And this inner voice said, and it was a masculine inner voice, this inner voice said, be still and know that I am God. I am with you now and always. And with those words, it was this profound spiritual feeling of peace permeated me. The plane hadn't crashed yet. We were still going down. And in this incredible state of peace, and I was fully conscious, I turned, I started comforting the patient, I turned off the oxygen tank. The pilot really, really heroically managed to guide and steer the free-falling plane to avoid crashing into the trees, because it's all forested up there in Northern Ontario. And he was guiding us over the surface of a semi-frozen lake, and he pulled up the wheels and he was trying to do a guided belly landing on the surface of the lake, which he sort of did, and we would have been okay, thanks to his heroism, if the ice had been thick enough, but it wasn't. And so when the plane finally stopped sliding and came to a stop, it very quickly broke through the ice, nosedived, and sank into very, very deep water. So the nurse, the pilot, and I had to, quickly get out of the plane as the plane was sinking, and we were trying to pull the patient out on her stretcher. Unfortunately, we could not get her out. She went out with the plane. And I found myself now, I'm wearing heavy winter clothes, like a heavy parka, heavy slacks, heavy boots, and I'm in a lake, I'm in water, and it's in the middle of a storm with really strong winds. And the closest land was maybe 200 yards away, and there was open water with a really strong current that separated me from the closest land. And going away from land was ice that we now know was too thin. And the pilot was shouting, "Try to get on the ice, try to get on the ice." And the voice in my head very, very clearly spoke again and said, "Swim to shore." Now, at that point in my life, I was very inexperienced in inner guidance or intuitive experiences. So I immediately mentally argued with this voice. No, I'm not going to swim to shore. I took lifeguarding, and they taught you in lifeguarding not to swim to shore in a boating accident. It's too far, you're going to drown, blah, blah, blah. So I, mentally argued with this voice, not knowing what it was, and started trying to get on the ice as the pilot was saying. Now the voice repeats, "Swim to shore." Still I ignored it. The third time the voice goes, "Swim to shore." Finally, I realized this ice is too thin. I'm going to listen to this voice and I'm going to swim to shore. Hopefully, I have now learned the spiritual lesson that listen to the inner voice when it gives you direction. It knows what it's talking about. But at that time, I was not aware of that higher guidance wisdom. So I turned and I started swimming to shore, and it was an extremely long and difficult swim, and I went under several times and then would struggle with all my power to get my mouth above water again and get some air. And part way to swimming to shore is when my near-death experience deepened or changed. And what happened was all of a sudden I heard this loud roaring noise, like the roar of a waterfall. And suddenly I felt my consciousness lifted up out of my body, and I found myself maybe 20, 30 feet above my body, looking down at my body that was struggling to swim to shore. Now, it's more complicated than that, because actually it was that my consciousness was two places at the same time. And I compare this to the split screen TV, where you have the big image on the big screen and a little image in the tiny screen in the corner at the same time. The main part of my consciousness rose higher, rose up higher, and I came into this place or realm or state of consciousness. It's really difficult to find the exact words, but it was filled with light and it was filled with love. And now, many years later, we've heard of other people talking about the realm of light in their near-death experiences, but back then I had not heard of such a thing. And for me, the most powerful aspect of what I was experiencing was not the light, but it was the love. I was feeling the most powerful, most beautiful, most complete, unconditional love that I had ever felt in my entire life. And for an instant, I saw like a face of light in the cloud-like periphery, and then it sort of settled, disappeared into the periphery. And my soul instantly recognized, that would be the word, recognized what I was experiencing. Like no person or voice had to explain to me what I was experiencing. My soul recognized it. I knew that what I was feeling, this incredible, powerful, unconditional love that I was feeling, is the love of our higher power, what I had been raised in my childhood to call God. And what I was actually experiencing God to be was nothing like what I'd been taught. It was not an old man with a long white beard sitting on a throne judging me, have you been good, have you been bad? No, that was not what I was experiencing. What I was actually experiencing, God or our higher power, by whatever name a person might call it, I was experiencing our higher power to be like an infinitely present, infinitely intelligent force field of love that is interpenetrating, underlying, sustaining all of creation and non-creation, past, present, and future. And which is much more like some of the Eastern traditions, how they conveyed a higher power. That was what I was actually experiencing. But I also completely got it that, okay, yeah, all of us down here on the earthly plane, we're trying to figure out this same one truth. And yeah, higher power gets it. But that's okay. Our partial understandings, yeah, higher power gets it. I also absolutely knew somehow within my soul that what I think of as me would live on, whether my physical body struggling in that drama below on the earthly plane would live or die. And it really didn't matter to me anymore whether that physical body made it to shore, because I was home. I was home. I was where I belonged. And it seemed like the split screen TV changed at that moment, that I was about to die, that now most of my consciousness was back in my body, physical body, and just a part of it was up above. And so I'm in my physical body mainly, and I'm looking through my physical eyes, and I can see that, shore is 25 feet away, and my physical body does not have the strength to swim that remaining distance. And I remember the thought very clearly that popped in my mind. It was, gee, it's true. You do drown the third time you go down, because this is going to be my third time going down. And I was totally at peace with dying and just, surrendering to going under for the final time and just remaining in the light. But then as I looked through my physical eyes, I saw that the current that was carrying me very rapidly to the right was carrying me towards this very tall pine tree that had fallen off the coast of it was an island I swam to, and was protruding into the water. And all I had to do really was do one more stroke, and the current would carry me right to this tree. So somehow my body found the strength. I did that one more stroke, and whoop, my hand hit that tree. And I was able to pull myself along that tree to shore, and I crawled over the ice onto the shore, and I shouted out to the nurse and the pilot, swim to shore, you can make it. Anyway, I huddled in a crouched position instinctively with my hands in tucked in my armpits, because I was freezing to death. My consciousness floated above my body, and I waited to see what would transpire. Now, in the middle of winter, in a storm, soaking wet, I was profoundly hypothermic. I had lake water in my lungs and was coughing. I would have died probably, within an hour had I not been rescued.
Jim White is a Santee Sioux and Yuwipi medicine man. During the COVID epidemic, he had 2 near-death experiences and now performs healing ceremonies and counsels people who have had NDEs.
When I looked around, it was my grandpa, Philip White, the old medicine man, Elmer Running, who I worked with, the other medicine man, Joe Tiona, who I worked with, and then the last one was Grandpa Wallace, Black Elk. I seen all four of them. They were all around me, and I started crying. And it felt so beautiful. The love is, you can't measure it. It takes you in, you know? And I'm like, Grandpa, I want to go with you. I'm tired. I don't want to be here no more, Grandpa. I want to go with you. And of course, it's all telepathy. It's all through the mind. And he looked at me, and he said, no, you can't go yet. And then Elmer, the medicine man that I worked with real closely for years, and he said, Jim, you got a lot of work to do. And then they disappeared. And I was laying there crying. That nurse come in there. What's wrong, Mr. White? I said, didn't you see them? Who? I said, my grandpa, Elmer. They're like, no. Then she walked out. She left me there. She was talking to, I could hear her talking. She said, he's in there crying. He was crying for his grandpa and some guy named Elmer, you know.
Peter Panagore had his first near-death experience in March 1980 while ice climbing in the Rocky Mountains of Alberta, Canada.
I know that I'm known by the knower.
Subsequently, Peter has written 2 books, Heaven is Beautiful, 2 Minutes for God, and hosts a spiritual podcast, all relating to near-death experiences.
I couldn't come up with 2 ice axes for the climb. I could only come up with 1 and a hammer. And a hammer is much shorter, which means it has a shorter distance on each swing, and it has a loop on the bottom to dangle it on your wrist, unlike the axe, which has a strap halfway up so that you can set your axe, let go, and rest. These 2 factors, the distance of my swing and the expenditure of extra energy to grasp this on a 500 or 600 foot climb, burned me out quite rapidly, which meant our climb was significantly slowed compared to the other teams on the ice that day ahead of us. By the time we were halfway up at lunch, we knew that we were in serious trouble because of me. By the time we reached the top of the climb, the temperature dropped 30 degrees in a moment as the sun dropped behind the mountain right across the Icefields Parkway from us, and hypothermia set in immediately with violent shivers. And as we tried to talk with our clattering teeth around our soft tongues, we decided not to snuggle together against the mountain for survivability because we knew that we would die in hours. The temperature kept declining, and so in the dark we decided to descend, our only chance to live. And we did. And hypothermia advanced through the night. We made mistakes as a result, but we drove forward. We contained and controlled our panic and our fear, which was mounting. Step by step, our bodies consumed the energy that was keeping us warm, but as we stepped by step, we knew that we came closer to dying right where we were because we were without some fuel to run us. By the time we reached the bottom of the second rappel, in the dark, we were standing on a ledge the size of a couple of boardroom tables, and there were iron pins with rings epoxied in with carabiners and harnesses. It was the top of the training rappel. And Tim was to my left and I was to my right, and it was sometime long after midnight. And I had the rope, and my feet had gone from feeling like fire to numb, and my fingers were blistered and my nose, and the cold kept coming, eyeballs frozen, tongue like a lead weight. Every motion and movement as my muscles froze was increasingly needed to have more care applied, more mental focus and force. I took the rope and tied it to my harness. I took the other end and I tossed it out around the corner of this crag that we had descended down and pulled, and the rope jammed and wouldn't come free. And now we couldn't descend and we couldn't ascend. And we were alone in a deep wilderness. Icefields Parkway was right next to us, but there's no traffic in this section of the world. Hypothermia continued. And eventually, I realized that I was not going to live. There was no way for me or Tim to get out of this. No one was coming. And we were dying. And when I accepted this peace came to me. I'd been driven for hours by this instinctual animal survival part of me that I hadn't known even existed. But it took over me and drove me. And then when I realized no way out, I gave up. And this peace settled on me. And I thought about my parents. My sister had vanished when I was a kid, and they were broken by that, which is why they wanted me home for this time that I wasn't there. And now I was going to die too, and nothing I could do about it. And I began to fall asleep like a curtain dropping on my consciousness, instant darkness. Collapse to the rock, smack my shoulder and my helmeted head, and stand back up and pull the rope again, which was never coming loose. And then I stood up this last time. And as I stood, I had this huge black ring around me. Peripheral vision was blocked, and it shrank and it shrank and it shrank until it almost was just about out. And I thought to myself, this is weird. This is bizarre. I must be falling asleep. And when it went out, I woke up. And I was confused that I was awake and not asleep because the mountain had vanished. All of my pain was gone. And I was a darkness. I was a darkness in a darkness. And in front of me was this expanded darkness that was the size of a universe, totally black. Except suddenly a single star appeared way far in the distance, and as it appeared, it was brilliant white and came rushing toward me and filled my vision and communicated to me telepathically, non-linguistically, non-conceptually, just information. I'm taking you, you're coming with me. And I myself said, no, not going anywhere, don't understand what's going on here. And it just swept me up as if my will was nothing and enveloped me in this energy, this orb of layered consciousness. And I had immobility inside of it, but it was speaking to me comfort and welcome and love and intellect and power. And the soul of me was severed from my body. I became a human shape made of light photons, 1 billion light photons. I was a being of light inside of this energy form, this angel that was superpositioned. It was somehow a reduction constructed from me who I knew, but also it was the total, infinite, eternal itself, both at the same time, both unlimited and in this limited form. And it was the voice of the divine that was speaking through this. And as it flew me back up the course it came to catch me, I was superpositioned. I could see through this angelic being. out into the darkness. I could see my body. I could see the shape of myself. I could see my light self. I had no eyes. But I was also outside of myself, outside of this angelic being. This darkness that I was in was a portion of the totality of the divine itself, the body itself. And I was an I. And I could see this being and me inside. And inside the being, I had 2 points of view. And inside this I had 2 points of view at the same time, not like a split screen, both part of one view. But when I looked from inside the angel, I couldn't see the I seeing me. I could only see from the I seeing me. The superpositioned part of me that was the divine I was too big for me to see. And then, almost as if I could hear electricity warming a 1920s radio tube, my brain came back online, roared back into existence, booted back up, and hearing came. But after suffering came, as I became aware of my body, pain returned immediately, not just the pain of the frostbite, but the pain of being a human being, the pain of being inside mortality. It's very hard to explain, like being in a spiked sarcophagus when I had lived in paradise with no suffering. And I began to hear noise and crying and screaming, and they resolved into words, and I understood, don't die, don't die, don't die. And I opened my eyes, and there was my partner, Tim, looking down at me, shaking me, crying, screaming, don't die. And then he realized my eyes were open. He said, I thought you were dead. You had died. And if you died, I was going to die. And I don't want to die. And he pulled me up. And it took me minutes to understand who I was and where I was and who he was and what was going on. But he guided me through pulling the rope again, which must have come loose by my angle on my fall. And we descended down, and my senses began to come back. I knew that I had been to the other place.
Kenny Collins is an entrepreneur and a Bigfoot researcher. His near-death experience was short, but still life-changing.
Well, back in 2019, I wanted to go to Westcliff, Colorado to visit my nephew. It was around July. Actually, it was July 10th on my birthday. So we have go up to the Westcliff area, and I visit my nephew, like I said, and they got me out in the backyard, and they're like, hey, you want to ride that bike over there? And I'm like, it looks like a dinosaur bike from the 50s. It's an old bush bike. And so they tricked me to kind of like, you used to ride, get on it. So I get on it, guys, and he starts it for me, and I'm thinking, well, I'm this big shot rider in my younger days. I'm gonna floor this acceleration, and I shouldn't have done that, because when I hopped on it and I revved it, and it went like a bronking horse into the air, and all of a sudden the handlebars are in the air, and I'm holding this bike, and it comes back down and crushes me on the ground on top of me. Now I was able, when it hit me, it went to the side, and I had enough to get up and go about 15 steps in through the door, and I dropped on my face. My wife's been a nurse for 40 years. She ran over apparently and grabbed me and turned me over, and at that time it was about a minute before, because when I first went in and fell, they didn't come to me right away. They were trying to figure out what was going on. They thought maybe I tripped, or they didn't know. It took them a minute to get to me. And by that time, I was gray. And because she flipped me, she's a nurse, she says, you were gray and not breathing. This is what she's telling me while I'm out. I guess while I was out that time, I don't know what happened. I went to a white room. I'm not in clothes. I'm not listening to a trumpet. I'm not seeing Peter at the gate. I'm just in a white, beautiful room. And I'm looking at this, like I want to touch it, like I want to stay here. And then I heard knock, knock, like a thump, boom. And something said to me, you're not ready yet. And then I hear my wife say, call 911. I hear that. You know what I do, guys? I wake up going, I'm not paying that bill. I snapped out of it. I came back. But I think at the time I was gone, was I in a waiting room? Was I in some type of dimension where they were making a decision to send me back or keep me? Thank God they sent me back, because I completed a lot since then.
Octogenarian PMH Atwater, as a result of 3 near-death experiences, became one of the original researchers in the field of near-death studies.
I was raped with a man, by a man who wanted to find out, believe it or not, later on, what his daughter went through when she was raped. So, believe it or not, he chose to rape someone so he could find out what that was like. I mean, bizarre. And that caused a pregnancy, and I died 3 times because of that pregnancy. The complications from the pregnancy. And the 3 times I died was January 2, 1977, January 4, 1977, and March 29, 1977. For me, in my case, I had to relearn how to crawl, how to stand, how to tell the difference between left and right, how to see properly, hear properly, and rebuild all my belief systems. So it was a very, very difficult time for me. But in my third near-death experience, I heard a voice. Among all the things that happened to me, this voice came through. I call it the voice like none other. Because it wasn't a man's voice, it wasn't an angel's voice, it wasn't your typical disincarnate of any kind. It was a voice so big, it was like the universe's voice. And that voice said, and I quote, "Test revelation. You are to do the research. 1 book for each death."
One of those books resulted in groundbreaking research into children and youth who had near-death experiences.
What we also find with the most near-death experiences, they become more intelligent. They know more. If they take an IQ test, it shows a difference in IQ, especially with children. Children who have a near-death experience before the age of 5. A huge difference in the brain and how it functions.
Near-death experiences are not exclusive to adults. Young people from as early as 3 years old to 19 can also encounter these profound events. Yet most research is unfortunately focused most entirely on adults, leaving many unaware that children too can have near-death experiences. Remarkably, the core elements of an NDE in the young mirror those reported by adults. These almost always include out-of-body experiences. Dr. Jeffrey Long, a radiation oncologist, has scientifically researched over 5,000 cases of near-death experiences.
A Pew Forum survey, a major organization that does surveys professionally, in 2021 found that in the United States, 72% of people they surveyed believed with a statement that a near-death experience was an observation of the soul separating from the physical body, which is a pretty good definition of near-death experience.
However, research into children's experiences remains limited, offering only glimpses into their unique journeys. Studies reveal intriguing after effects among young experiencers. Enhanced intelligence, heightened psychic abilities, and ease with abstract concepts, and a deepened sense of compassion for others. Yet for children, reintegration into everyday life often proves more challenging.
You can understand the difficulty of someone who had a near-death experience very promptly starting to share that with other members of their family, friends, family, and loved ones. And in fact, their people that they know well in their earthly life may not have understood just how close to death that they are. So it's not at all unusual for people that have near-death experiences to go through a difficult time, especially shortly after their experience.
Lacking the verbal skills to process or articulate what they've been through, many only come to understand the depth of their experience later in life. Sometimes after a second or third near-death encounter. Here are some amazing cases of NDEs that occurred early in life. Susan Grau, a celebrated intuitive and spiritual mentor. She recently shared her remarkable life story in her new book, Infinite Life, Infinite Lessons. Susan's early childhood near-death experience opened her to a luminous realm of unconditional love and infinite knowledge.
My own NDE was quite extensive, honestly. I was 4.5 years old. I was locked in an unplugged freezer in a garage. Some boys I was playing with said they wanted popsicles. I tried to get them, and the garage freezer was unplugged. They closed the door, they closed the garage door, and out they went. And I thought it was a joke, and I thought I was in on the joke, but I was not. I was locked face in, and I couldn't get out. And I screamed and screamed. My mother heard "your baby's in the freezer" and did not take any action. She thought it was just her imagination, unfortunately. Well, fortunately and unfortunately, to be honest. I saw 3 white, beautiful, bright white lights. One was much more alive and vibrant than the others. And they told me that not to scream anymore. They'd get my mommy. And I waited and I kept screaming, and I waited and I kept screaming because I was a little girl and I was scared. I was terrified. And I could just feel it like a coffin closing in on me, to be honest. It felt very frightening. And all of a sudden I wasn't in my body, and I was at the bottom of some stairs, and I looked up and was told that I had to get to the top of those stairs. And so it just happened, just like that. I was just there. And I looked in this hole, and it was a giant circle, and it had all this movement. Today I see it as DNA, or words mixing, intermingling. It looked like DNA, like strings. And I didn't know what it was. And I asked them, "Where am I?" And they said, "You're in the room of heart's desires." And I said, and I knew what they meant, even though I was only 4.5, I understood. And I looked down into this well, which Dr. Moody now tells me was the tunnel. And I said, "Do you answer all these?" And they said, "No, Susie, sometimes what people desire the most isn't good for them." And I proceeded to see this beautiful yellow brick road. I called it the yellow brick road because I had seen The Wizard of Oz, so that makes sense to me. And I saw people on this path, and they were going to this pyramid, and they were removing pavers from the bottom of this pyramid, and they were building a path. And I said, "What are they doing?" And they said they think they're building their own path. They think they're in charge. And I started seeing these humans, who I think were humans, saying, "For the love of God, please help me." And they were crying, and they were on their knees. And in came these beautiful lights. And they picked up the pavers, and they put them back to the bottom of this pyramid. I didn't understand it then, but I understand it now. That was our life journey. And when we pull from the bottom of a pyramid, we unbalance our life. And so they put them back and they went to the top of this pyramid and they took the pavers and started paving the path. And I said, what are you doing? And they said, we are the pavers. You are not. And all you have to do is walk the path. And I said, well, what if you're walking it wrong? That's pretty precocious. I was 4.5, almost 5, tipping on 5. And I said, what if you're walking it wrong? And they said, then we will bless or block it. And make no mistake, you can get through the blocks battered and bruised at best, or you can shift. And if you see a block again, you shift. And if you see a block again, you shift until you see the path that we are paving. And all you'll have to do is walk it. And there was more to that story. And then I went into another room that was called the Room of Knowledge. People call it the Akashic Records on this planet. I don't relate to that. I always have called it the Room of Knowledge. And it was, now looking back, I can see it as virtual books, but there wasn't anything virtual at the time. And I just saw all of this, all these openings, and all of this information was pouring in. And there were people there, and it was souls, and they were, planning things. And I said, what are they doing? And they told me that they are planning their next incarnation. And I said, well, why are they in this room? And they said, this is the Room of Knowledge. It has everything they need to know where they were, where they're going, where they will be. They know the beginning, the middle, and the end. And they will need to grow their souls during that process. And they go back and incarnate to do so. And I didn't understand what they meant. And so I started asking questions about that, and they gave me details about that. And every time I started to understand something, I'd be zapped into another place. And it just kept feeling that way to me, like I was moving all over. And they told me, you're going to come back, you're going to be a healer, and one day you'll write your story. And I didn't relate at all to what they were saying. They took me into another room that was the Room of Companions. And it was animals. I didn't see my animals. I didn't see my loved ones. And then I was in this beautiful, it was tall grass with beautiful flowers everywhere, yellow, everything was yellow. And I looked up to my left and I saw something on a mountain. And it was this amazing bright light, and it was all love. It was just all love. And I looked to my right and there was this little cobblestone house, and out came one of the lights. And I called her a light angel. And she said to me, it's time for you to go back and be back in your body. And I was fine with that. I wanted my mommy. I think when people are young, they feel very different having a near-death experience than the older people who have already knows what life has in store for them here. The lessons we have to learn. I was not aware of those. Not enough. I had enough. I had some before that, but not enough. And she came to me, and I stood up, and she walked me to a river. And she said, you're going to go into the river. We are all born and reborn in water. And you will be back with your mommy. And I want you to remember who you are. And I want you to remember what your job is on this planet. And always remember that love is the answer. Love is our truth. And if you can feel love and compassion and be kind and good, no matter what happens to you, you will always be in survival of that and thrive through that. And I thought, okay, don't understand clearly, but I get it. I hear you. And I didn't want to go back then. I didn't want to go into the water. I was afraid. And I knew how to swim, so that seems odd, but I was still afraid. And she said, there's nothing to fear. This is where you're going to get back to your mommy, and it's okay. And are you ready? And I said, okay. And the next thing I knew, I was on the floor with my chin cracked open. And my mother said that she heard it again. Your baby's in the freezer. And she didn't respond again. And then she said she heard it one more time. And I remember seeing her and thinking, Mommy, I'm in the freezer. Mommy, help me. And she wasn't responding, but I was learning how to talk to her. I think that's how I became a medium, is I learned how to speak from the afterlife. And I knew that I would somehow figure it out. She would hear me at some point. She was my mommy. She's supposed to hear me. But she said she heard it from somewhere else. And it was her intuition. And my family all had this gift except my father and one of my brothers.
Dr. Doug Seeley experienced his NDE during the moment of birth into this world. A rebirther took him back to that time.
Well, a friend of mine was offering rebirthing experiences, and I was curious to find out what mine was about. So I went to her, and we did a certain kind of breathing, and it seemed to me like I did it for almost half an hour before things cut in, so to speak. When they cut in, I experienced what my birth was like, because it was affirmed later on through talking to my mother. I experienced the most extreme pain and anxiety I'd ever experienced. It seemed like 40 times stronger than any of that. I was in terror, in utter terror, and I did not know how to get out of it. And finally, there was someone, myself or the person running the show, said, "You're out." And when I felt I was out, all that terror and pain just melted away, and I was hugged by the person. As I was hugged, every cell in my body went into an ecstatic orgasm. That's the only way I can describe it. It's an ecstatic state, and every cell in my body was feeling it. And I realized something I could not really put into words because I was a child. I realized I was home. I realized I was totally cared for. I realized this is the way things actually are. So what happened in that is that I started to interpret that. And what I noticed about it, well, I first of all, I walked home that night, that evening, just after it happened. It took me a half an hour. I was high as a kite. And when I got home, I told my wife about it. And she said to me, "Well, your mother had told me about this, but she said to never talk to you about it." Because my mother, the reason that I had the terror was that my mother, who was very alone at the time, didn't feel she had any support from anybody. And my father was away training to be in the army. And as she was going through the birth stages, she asked the nurse, the only one else in the hospital at the time, what's happening. And the nurse said, "It's the head," because her vagina had started to open a bit. And my mother, who was very high-strung and very, very, what can I say, anxiety-ridden, she thought the nurse said, "It's dead." And she went into a really extreme form of reaction to that. So it was the reaction that I was experiencing. I was reacting to her utter terror that she had experienced as thinking I was dead. And that was what I experienced coming out the canal. And afterwards, my impression of it was that it happened this way so that I would become incarnated as a human, but I still have a strong impression of where I came from. And that has not changed at all. I've had that for 40 years now. Where I came from was what normally is called heaven. And I was just bringing a piece of that with me because of the terror.
Hailing from New Zealand, Christy Salisbury is the host of the acclaimed Let's Talk Near Death podcast, where she delves into profound stories and insights surrounding near-death experiences and the afterlife. In addition to her podcasting work, Christy is also a dedicated end-of-life worker. Her own near-death experience arose from a harrowing accident.
I was 12 years old and I was a keen gymnast at the time. I hit my head on the bars when I was at school, swinging around the bars, hit my head. Within about 48 hours, I started to develop quite a bad headache. So it wasn't the same day, I think it was the next day the headache started to come. By the evening, it was extremely bad. I wasn't feeling well, so I went to bed. I ended up waking up and I felt very sick. I had a brain bleed, and so I was trying to get out of bed because I felt sick, so I was trying to get out to go to the bathroom. I collapsed on the floor, and it was then that I realized that something was very, very wrong. I had this throbbing headache, and I could pinpoint exactly where the pain was coming from, and my body wasn't working. So I was lying on the floor, trying to get up out of bed, couldn't move properly. And then the next thing I remember is waking up the next morning and I was in the hospital. So what had happened was I'd had the brain bleed, I'd had a full stroke. They'd rushed me into hospital. I have a few memories throughout the night, but basically they rushed me into hospital, took me straight into surgery. I had emergency brain surgery to remove what we call an AVM, so that's an arterial venous malformation, which is basically a part of my brain that was a bit malformed that had caused the brain bleed when I hit my head. They did emergency surgery, emergency brain surgery. I flatlined on the table. They brought me back. I flatlined again. And at that point, they realized that they had to abort the surgery, that it was too dangerous. They wouldn't be able to keep me alive if they continued to remove the area which was the problem within my brain. So I woke up and I was in the critical care unit of the hospital. I was paralyzed down one side of my body. I had tubes everywhere. And I was wondering how I got back to where I'd been, because I'd been in this most beautiful space. It started where I was in a place of nothingness. I wasn't aware of earth. I wasn't aware of anything other than questioning, where was I? There was nothing there. It was empty. It was void. It was dark. The words don't actually really describe how it was. I was in this space and I was trying to question where I was, and I could hear my father's voice, and my father was trying to connect with me. I was trying to connect with him. I couldn't see him. I couldn't find him. I couldn't find my body. I was just there in essence, I suppose. I managed to connect with my father, who was alive at the time, so that was really interesting. Connected with him, and then everything around me changed. It was like someone had turned on the whitest light. And I was in the whitest light, and I was suddenly aware that I wasn't where I was before, but I hadn't actually transported anywhere. I was just suddenly in this different space, and all around me were silhouettes of people. Now I say people, I didn't know who they were, I didn't know what they were. They were standing in a circle around me, and I was trying to see who they were. I was waiting for my eyes to adjust, and I was trying to see who they were, and I couldn't. And the harder I tried, the more I felt like I wasn't allowed to see who they were. So they had no features. They were just silhouettes of, I guess, people. And I was trying so hard to see them, I couldn't see them. And then all I know was I was back in my body. And I was wondering where the people had gone, where the light had gone. I was keen about what had happened, but at the same time, I somehow knew everything that had happened. I knew I'd been unwell. I knew I'd had this illness. I knew everything was exactly as it was meant to be. And I knew that that place, it was so welcoming. They were cheering, they were clapping, they were there just for me, and they were so happy to see me. But it wasn't my time. I wasn't allowed to see them yet. And I knew everything back on Earth was exactly as it was meant to be. I knew I had quite a future ahead of me, a lot of rehab. I knew that things were going to be tough from time to time, but everything felt perfect.
Julia Asante, PhD, is a trailblazer in the field of near-death studies. As both a scholar and a spiritual pioneer, she authored the acclaimed book, The Last Frontier, exploring the afterlife and transforming our fear of death, one of the earliest deep dives into near-death experiences. Julia experienced her first near-death event when she was a teenager.
I was severely, severely ill to the point of dying. And my father, as a doctor, had pumped me with too much stuff and was afraid that I was dying. And so I went into this state, and there was this little tiny speck, and I was within this little speck. And I was in an ecstatic, I was just ecstatic. And I knew that I could stay that way for eternity, or I could go back to my body. You know, I could be in that ultimate state, still and focused. And I chose to go back to take the highs and the lows of life.
Dr. Deborah King's journey is both inspiring and extraordinary. She experienced a profound near-death experience as an adult. But Deborah also had, like many near-death experiencers, she had one earlier in life. These transformative experiences shaped her path, guiding her toward a life dedicated to the care and healing of others.
If you ask about the very first time I was aware that one could be outside of their body and fully alive, it was when I was 17 years old. And I was the passenger in my father's car. He was driving, and we were sitting at a red light, waiting for the light to change. And I was sitting, in the passenger seat, in the front seat. And my father was one of those that, and he taught me this as well, always kind of delay when the light turned green, look to the left and the right, because somebody could be running the light. And I remember looking to the left with him, and that's the last thing I remember. The very next thing I remember is being out of my body and looking down on what looked like just a horrific accident scene. And I recognized my father's car, and very quickly I recognized my body. And I thought, well, if I'm down there and I'm in that wreck, how am I here? I'm 17 years old. I really had no experience to link this to. And I watched my father. He miraculously was able to get himself out of the car. The car was really, really a wreck. And I was an orthopedic disaster. I was unconscious, and he was running around the vehicle trying to get me out of the car. He couldn't. He was holding his head. He was frantic, and I felt no fear again. It was total absence of fear. The most striking emotion that I felt was for my father. I felt empathy and compassion. I wanted to tell him I was okay. And I really didn't know how that was possible. I really couldn't understand that, but that was the case. And I had no way to communicate with him. And that made me sad because I could see how upset he was. And quickly, as soon as I really was trying to figure this out, just like that, I was back in my body. And the rescue squad came and at some point I regained consciousness and I heard my father saying, thank God, Debbie, you're going to be okay. But you're right, that I didn't know it at the time, but that experience kind of set me on a path that kind of built critical mass of other spiritual experiences after that. I told nobody about it, by the way.
Neurosurgeon Dr. Eben Alexander is a pioneer in exploring consciousness beyond brain-based models and has had his own near-death experience.
Near-death experiences are the tip of the spear, but this discussion of the relationship between brain and mind is far, far bigger than just what happens during near-death experiences. So, for example, we also have that whole category of shared death experiences, where a bystander soul gets taken along, even to the point of witnessing a full-blown life review of a departing soul before that bystander soul comes back to this world. And these shared death experiences are very powerful because they completely bypass the nonsensical materialist pseudo-explanations for NDEs that have to do with, say, decreased oxygen tension or increased CO2 levels in the blood, etc. And what we realize is we need a much bigger theater of operations to really explain these. And they're not simply some dream or hallucination that bubbles up out of a dying brain.
Scott Taylor is America's foremost facilitator of near-death and shared-death meditations and retreats. He describes his own shared-death experience between a mother and her dying son in the non-physical world.
It was 1981, and I was in love with a woman. Her name was Mary Frances Randall, and Mary Fran had been out sailing on Lake Washington in beautiful southern Minnesota. And she and her son Nolan were coming home from that day of sailing, and they were involved in this horrific car accident. And Mary Fran was killed outright. And Nolan, who had just turned 7, had this mortal head wound. And luckily, we live in southern Minnesota, so both Mary Fran and Nolan were taken immediately to the Mayo system, where they had terrific care. But Nolan's injuries were such that his body couldn't sustain life, and it took 6 days for him to make his transition. That winds up being important because Mary Fran was one of 9 children, and Nolan was the eldest grandchild. And so during that intervening 6 days, all these people had a chance to come and to hold vigil for Nolan. And so 2 of us would go in for a 2-hour shift, and we just did that 24/7. And as it turns out, my shift was with Janie, who was Mary Fran's eldest sister. We told him funny stories, and then it got to be about 4:45 in the morning. And Janie, who was a trained ER nurse, took a look at his chart and then took a look at all of the monitors. And she looked at me, she held out her hand and said, "Scott, it's time we say goodbye." And so we gathered our chairs around Nolan's head and we said, Nolan, you have been an extraordinarily brave boy, that you have tried so hard and fought so hard for us, that you want to stay and be with us. But if your mother should come to get you, a reminder that Mary Fran had died 6 days before, but if your mother comes to get you, it's okay if you need to go with him. That would be a good choice. So we said goodbye. We told him that we loved him, and then it's 5 o'clock and we left and the next shift came in. Well, it wasn't, more than 45 minutes later when the nurse came into the waiting room where we were all scattered around on these couches and told us that it was time. And we filed into this little hospital room, and as it turns out, I was one of the very last to enter into that space. And when I came into the room, it was already 5 deep around the bedside. There were that many people there, so I said, well, nuts, this is goofy. So I just went over and sat on the windowsill next to Mary Fran's youngest brother, Willie, and there we waited. There isn't a lot to do as you watch, a person's heart monitor, and it slowed and was slower, and eventually it flatlined. And when Nolan flatlined, what I experienced was Mary Fran coming across the veil, and she went to her son and scooped him up out of his physical body. And they had this most extraordinary reunion. And I was a bit taken aback by that, because I was able to feel what it is that they were exchanging between the two of them. And you can only imagine, because this is a reunion between mother and child. But then what really surprised me was the two of them then turned to me, came over and embraced me, and the three of us left and went to the light. And in that light, I was connected to everything. I was embraced in the loving compassion that is the universe. I was held by this most amazing presence. But that was all secondary, because here I was in the light with Mary Fran and Nolan, and we had a chance to affirm our love and connection, the three of us. And then we had a chance to say a proper goodbye, because I was at work when, Mary Fran and Nolan were coming home from the lake, so I wasn't anywhere near the accident. And then we had a chance just to be together, to be able to be in each other's presence one last time. And then at some point, it was just complete.
From the many reports of near-death experiencers, it is clear that an NDE can happen to any of these people. NDEs do not discriminate with regard to age, gender, ethnicity, race, sex, culture, or belief systems. This supports the idea that humans are all one at some deeper level. An NDE often begins with an out-of-body experience. Ray Hernandez has co-authored a number of papers with Dr. Jeffrey Long about the importance of near-death experiences for understanding that consciousness is primary.
With out-of-body experiences, again, similar to NDEs, your consciousness leaves your body. You see your body underneath you. Or if you have an astral travel experience, your consciousness, just like an NDE, is going to other multi-dimensional realms and interacting with these realms.
The out-of-body thing is really what's going on with the near-death experiencers.
Many people describe hovering above their physical body and observing the scene of their medical crisis or accident.
One of the most powerful lines of evidence for the reality of near-death experience is what typically occurs early often as the first thing that happens is called an out-of-body experience. And what happens is, well, again, they're so physically compromised, they're physically unconscious or clinically dead. And yet at that time, consciousness separates from the physical body, typically rising above the physical body. And from that vantage point, they can see ongoing earthly events, often visualizing their dramatic efforts at other people trying to bring them back to life, the resuscitation team, the EMTs. So the out-of-body experience has been fairly extensively researched, including by my own research. And what we've all found is that those out-of-body observations with consciousness above the physical body, what they see, what they hear, is accurate down to the finest details. And in fact, we have a whole series, a fairly good-sized series of people that had that out-of-body experience as part of their near-death experience, but their consciousness actually left the area of their physical body and may have traveled hundreds of yards, even literally miles away. And once again, amazingly, what they see, what they hear, with their conscious awareness far outside of any physical bodily sensory awareness, is incredibly accurate down to the finest details when they check it out later.
This event has been observed by medical professionals who are attending to dying people. Dr. Deborah King has experienced this phenomena many times.
So the most striking experience was when I was a critical care nurse, and I was involved in a resuscitation of a patient that was not going well. And I really had an intuitive knowing that I really was not rational. Everything in my brain told me, my left brain anyway, that this was not going well and we were going to have to stop the resuscitation. But I had a strong intuitive knowing that if we continued, we would get this man back, and we did. And after we did, he remained comatose for about 48 hours and then regained consciousness and was able to tell me everything that happened in that resuscitation, down to where I was standing in the room, what was said amongst the team. And when that experience happened to me, and I remember saying, I don't know how this happened, but this changes everything for me.
As we have seen, many younger people who have near-death experiences, leaving the body is the most profound phenomenon remembered. Often, children and many adults who travel to the non-physical or afterlife realm during a near-death experience are told to return to their body in normal physical reality.
The significant majority of people at the end of their near-death experience are sent back involuntarily. Sometimes, however, there's a dialogue with other beings that are with them. And interestingly, we have some recent research that came out from literally thousands of near-death experiences that found that about 10 to 12% of the near-death experiences, near the end of their occurrence, they were told by another being, "Your work is not done, you have more to do," or language like that, which is absolutely amazing that so many people literally around the world are hearing such a similar concept. Implication very strong that our earthly life is profoundly meaningful and significant.
Inside of this tunnel that led to my body were 10,000 doors, 1,000,000 doors. And all of the doors were choices. And this whole field of doorways and hallways were probabilities of lives I could live. And the choices I would make would move me from layer to layer, tunnel to tunnel, hallway to hallway. But as I traveled, I got to the end of it. And there was this body on this cliff. I didn't know who it was or what was going on. I didn't understand any of this. I could just see it. And a man was bended over, and a man was lying on his back, hanging, dangling. And the angelic being rapidly approached one of the bodies, the body lying on its back, and pierced its chest and opened it up and took me and screwed me inside, or stabbed me in, or crushed me down and put me inside. And I was inside, and I could see out through this eye hole in the heart. I could see my angel I could see back to the darkness, and then the hole just closed.
So anyway, I was shuffling through all these different scenarios of what this thing could be and pulling from all this data field, and finally determined that it was a face of a living being. I remember recognizing that it was alive and physical and just sorting through it all. And I recognized that it was suffering. And then I got closer to the face, and I was like hovering like this far above it, looking directly down at the face. And I looked at the eyes and recognized that they were eyes, that was a process of determining what eyes were and what their function was and all that. And the eyes were just staring. And then I recognized that it was suffering. The mouth was open. I felt pity for it. I didn't want to be a part of it. I mean, pity is like, go away, It's kind of like, yeah, I feel sorry for you, but don't come closer, that kind of sensation. And that was the first emotion I felt, as that particular aspect of my being was pity. And then I just kept watching it and observing it. And again, this was very rapid, but again, it was like, it wasn't rapid, it was a process. And I eventually recognized that it had green eyes, and what the color green was, and what colors were, and that sort of thing. And then, as I'm sitting there staring at it, because again, I felt like I had binocular vision again, like maybe I was in some type of form, I don't know. It wasn't just an energy being. And as I'm watching it, that pity shifted to compassion. And when I shifted to compassion, it was almost instantaneous. There was a connection with it, and I remember just like flipping 180 degrees and getting sucked down into it. And that's when I woke up in the CVICU.
Another commonly reported phenomenon during an NDE is contact with beings. Beings that could occur on a spectrum that vary from known people who have passed to angelic beings to strange humanoids to abstract souls to a mysterious divine presence.
It is true that there are plenty of beings of one type or another out there helping us. One of the reasons I know that with my work, the afterlife stuff, you cannot imagine how many people are in trouble. The people who've died. It's amazing how much work I've done in that area. But they need people. They need something, and they're not all human, believe me.
I stopped breathing again. And then, you know how you can hear the alarms go off and stuff? And then at that time, I could feel my grandpa Philip's presence beside me. And then outside of the hospital, they had the curtains shut. I seen the silhouettes of my two uncles that are also deceased. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm gonna go home, And I think my grandpa touched my leg down here. And then I started to breathe again.
I was zeroing in on what I would call my group. And to me, they were a group that I'd been a part of since the beginning of my existence, whatever that was. They were non-physical, I would say energy beings. And so I joined them and became a part of the group again. And then I recall swiftly, a sense of, I had emotions. They weren't human emotions, but a sense of relief to be back where I belonged.
I had the experience of these light beings, these beautiful light beings, telling me that it was not my time and that I needed to wake up. And they were like panicky, like, you need to wake up, Dave, you need to wake up. And I mean, even the voices sounded familiar, but all I could see was like this shimmering figures of these people. And they kept telling me, wake up, Dave, it's not your time.
There was a person that showed up, and he was distinctly male, but he wasn't necessarily a deity. He didn't feel like an angel. He didn't necessarily feel human, but he came up over my left side and he told me, you won't be here forever. And I thought, awesome. Someone's here. I'm not alone and I'm not here forever. And I have no choice but to trust this entity. And it seemed like this entity knew me. It knew me, even if I didn't know who it was.
The third and perhaps the most important experience reported during an NDE is the power of unconditional love. The unconditional love of God, which is often depicted by seraphims. Beings exuding light and a sense of divine power. The love experiencers encounter is often described as beyond anything they have ever encountered in earthly life. A love so pure and complete that it transcends human understanding.
If I were to comment on the theme of unconditional love, it presented itself really in two paramount ways. The first was that in the experience, when I was surrounded by light and love, and I was just, there was no sense of the future, the past. It was just in the now, in the moment. And the predominant feeling was one of just complete acceptance. I didn't have to do anything, didn't have to produce anything, didn't have to be anywhere. I just felt totally loved for who I was in that moment and my connection to a greater matrix and web of light and love.
Love. Everything is based in soul growth and love. Our goal here is not to love others. We come here innately being able to do that, most of us, if we're not sociopathic or have mental illness. Our goal is to have self-love. We are the hardest on ourselves. And so one of our big soul growths and soul clarity and expanded awareness is being able to love ourselves. And that's what it feels like there. They are instant love. There is no communication that is negative or harmful that I've ever seen. I felt completely compassionate love, unconditional love.
Is that love there for every single being? Yes, it is. Is that what everybody experiences in their near-death experience? No, it's not. Because there are different types of near-death experiences. But is there the potential for everyone to reach that realm of love or the high astral heavens? I'll use that vocabulary. Yes, that potential is there for everyone.
It is so unlike. Unconditional infinite love is so radically different from the human experience, which is a reflection of it, a little tiny portion of it in 10,000 different ways. Love's real, it lasts, it's the treasure. But unconditional infinite love is the difference between a quark and the multiverse in size. This is what we experience here, is this little tiny aspect of it. The expandedness of it is inconceivable. It's unspeakable. It's eternal.
It looked like a map of brain neurons is what I got. It had pink lines and it glowed purple, and where the pink lines came together, it glowed bright yellow, and it just gave off immense love. And he told me, to my mind, that's the fabric of humanity. And he just let me sit with him for a moment and just take it in.
So what's the nature of this love that we talk about as we enter into the non-physical universe and we become one with this loving consciousness that is out there? I think that the nature of this love is revealed to us the more that we begin to participate in it and reunite with it, because it's not the simple love of one person for another. It's that love that allows us to connect with one another and accept each other and have compassion for each other, and to know that we are one with all that is.
So as an adult, the near-death experience I had in 2013, as an adult, I was in a very simple environment. It was nothing but love and light. That's all I can describe it as, was love and light, and then other beings that were there with me, and senses and things like that. But the love was something that just pervaded everything. It was all pervasive, it was all around you. It was a part of, like right now we're breathing air. It was like you're breathing it. It was a part of you, it was surrounding you. It was, a major component of the existence there was love. I can't describe that because it's not something we can translate back here in the physical realm, but that's what it was. It was wonderful.
For the longest time, when I'd bring it up to people, I would get teary, but I would feel like overwhelmed and warm. And the feeling of love was like nothing I ever felt. I've never felt so much love in my whole life. It was so amazing. And it has changed the thing. To me, it has actually changed the way I look at things nowadays.
Because near-death experiences are the result of the body and the brain shutting down from trauma. Traumas that include accidents, acute physical distress, and acute medical issues. The after effects, or afterglow, as it is sometimes called, are varied and can vary as much as the near-death experiences.
The typical changes that occur after near-death experiences are called after effects. And there's certainly some researchers that believe that near-death experiencers often get special abilities, psychic abilities, mediumship abilities, and that hasn't been studied nearly as well as I wish it had. Other people like me say, well, the one thing we know best from researching near-death experiences is that certainly after a near-death experience, the great majority are profoundly changed.
The positive kind of aspects of NDEs, more intuitive, more empathic. I clearly, in my own view and according to family and close friends, I had a major enhancement in kind of my intuitive and empathic abilities. And I think that that's very much the case in my own story.
I find that my near-death experience gave me many aftergifts. Some of them are in the psychic realm. Some of them are in the psychic realm. But many of them are in the interpersonal space. I came back, and they overlap. I came back with this capacity to see the light inside of people and show them the light inside of me. And I can see into people.
And if you start to feel gratitude, your whole day is going to change. Your body's going to change.
Well, when I was 6.5, without thinking very much about it, I tried to share the consciousness of the girl who was the smartest one in my grade 1 class. And I just intuitively knew that could happen. I have no idea where it came from. No adult had suggested it to me. I just attempted to do that. And without success, I might have had when I was 6.5. And later on, when I was a bit older, I had a very strong precognitive experience when I was in a hockey game. And it was about the nature of who was going to score the goals in the game.
These new things started happening to me. I also discovered that I was clairaudient. So we now call this developing all the clairs, clairvoyance, clairaudience, and clairsentience, as an after effect from the near-death experience. I now realize that that voice of higher guidance that I heard as the plane was going down, and also when it was telling me to swim to shore, was the beginning of this clairaudience.
That was my first big push into spirituality, even though I was practicing it before, you know, going to Sweat Lodge, going to Sundance, going to Vision Quest. But I still wasn't spiritual. I was just doing it, and I didn't have the knowledge or the intelligence behind it, you know. So when that happened, it kind of drove me forward. I'm trying to share with people our way of life, which is a spiritual way of life, which is a way of Mother Nature, Mother Earth, and also of universe. It's no Christian in it at all. It's universe, it's Mother Earth, it's spiritual. And I think when people start opening up to that, they start getting more answers of the questions that they have in the back of their head, you know?
Other near-death experiencers go through a period of depression. I mean, here they are in a beautiful, unearthly realm, no pain, overwhelming sense of peace and love. They often describe this unearthly, beautiful, heavenly realm as a strong sense of being their real home. So to suddenly be thrust back into the earthly life, trying to recover from what nearly killed them, you know, understandably, they go through some depression and some yearning for that life beyond.
I mentioned it to a few people, but again, just thought that I was a bit crazy, didn't realize the depth of it, and just didn't know what to do with it. 12 years old.
I was getting visited. I was getting visits from people asking me for help, and I don't know, I'd wake up angry because whatever these people were come and asked me for help, I didn't understand what they wanted, didn't know who they were, and then they would get mad. But then I'd also have visits from loved ones during my dreams too, coming to me, you know, like the night that my mom passed away. My family didn't tell me right away because my dad wanted me to make sure I made it to work. But before I even found out she passed away, she came to me and she says, "I love you, kiddo, I have to go." And she was in dementia state at that time and very unhealthy. But when she came to visit me, she was her normal self.
Throughout most of history, it was assumed that there was a non-physical aspect to each person. That all changed when, in the 19th century, consensus science became the single arbitrator of the truth. However, a problem arose with consciousness. The felt experiences we all have of an outside physical world and the internal world of emotions and self-talk could not be explained by science. The question became, why should consciousness exist at all? The best science could do was to say that the brain produces consciousness. Near-death experiences challenged that theory.
If one were to ask me, let's say 40 years ago, maybe a little bit more than that, what produced consciousness, I would say the brain. Of course, the brain. The brain produces consciousness. After being a healthcare professional for many years and experiencing my own near-death experience, I absolutely now know that being out of my physical body, out of, certainly wasn't connected to my brain. My brain was not being perfused. My EEG, electroencephalogram, was flat, no electrical activity of my heart or my brain. And yet I was fully alive and fully conscious. So I believe that that paradigm truly has to shift. And there's nothing really woo-woo about that. This is really about universal consciousness that the brain is the receptacle for, or that the brain is an antenna for, the brain connects with and allows us to live in our human body and make sense of the world. But it's a very temporary experience. We are not, what I experienced primarily was not being a body with a soul, but a soul with a very temporary body.
It is so liberating to work away from that bleak and paltry fiction of materialism that pretends we're material bodies that have no free will, that are just chemical reactions going on, and an illusion of consciousness, to acknowledging that we have powerful free will that influences all of our emergent reality. And to me, that's the real gift of an NDE.
One of the most important messages from near-death experiences is that you, me, everyone is immortal. Here we are in our physical earthly life, but it's important to remember every shred of evidence in near-death experiences suggests that our earthly physical life is the tiniest slice of our eternal existence that we have. Our real selves, our real eternal souls, are going to have that existence in those heavenly realms, in that afterlife where there is no death, there is no misery, there is bliss beyond anything we could know on earth. And that's exciting. That's perhaps one of the most important messages of near-death experience. And in fact, the awareness that each and every one of us have that destiny in that immortal, eternal life is literally, in my opinion, perhaps the most profoundly positive message that is even conceivable to share with all of humanity.